This interactive video is on philosophy in general, and then bioethics in particular, and where bioethics fits into the grander scheme of philosophical inquiry. So, the word philosophy is from ancient Greek, and it's philia plus sophia, and etymologically, it means love of wisdom. So the Greeks had at least 7 different words to describe like different senses of love, right? Often in English, we kind of overburden that word love. Like, oh, I love my husband. I love my mom. I love my dog. I love burritos, right? But you kind of, or I love my best friend, or I love my new shoes. But you kind of mean something different with each of those loves, but we tend to just slap one word on that to cover it all, right? They recognize different senses of love, like eros, erotic love, right? Sexual, sensual love. Storge, which is like love for family, familial love, and the feelings you develop for something very familiar to you, kinship love. Agape, which is like an all-encompassing, completely general kind of universal love of, like humankind in general. Sometimes in the Christian tradition, agape is like love of God, but love of really big concepts, right? And philia is to have an affinity for, to really enjoy, to kind of be turned on by something. So I know that Philadelphia is the city of brotherly love, but really philia best equates to having an attraction to that isn't just sexual. It's really enjoying something, like you might pick out a friend that you really enjoy. So that's the philia that's being spoken about in the word philosophy. And so here's a few broad definitions of philosophy in general. So in a broad sense, philosophy is an activity people undertake when they seek to understand fundamental truths about themselves and the world in which they live and their relationships to the world and to each other. All of us get philosophical from time to time. But as an academic discipline, philosophy is much the same, except it's done academically, right? Those who study philosophy are perpetually engaged in asking, answering, and arguing for answers to life's most basic questions. And to make such a pursuit more systematic, academic philosophy it's traditionally divided into major areas of study. And I'm sure that you've encountered this in other courses you've taken so far. Like there might be, the grand category of biology, but then it's broken down into subcategories and sub-focuses. Philosophy is much the same. So we'll take a look at a few of those. So first there's logic. Many of you have taken a logic course or a critical thinking course. And logic's the study of the formal and informal structures of sound thinking and good argumentation, like premises and conclusions, deduction versus induction, how you evaluate each of those classes of arguments, and the common informal fallacies that are often committed in pursuit of truth, for instance. And then there's a whole bunch of types of logic, like syllogistic or Aristotelian categorical logic. There's propositional logic, predicate logic, modal logic. A lot of it can start looking just like math, right? Where everything boils down to symbols and operators, almost like code, software coding or computer coding. Then there's metaphysics. And metaphysics, the formal study of metaphysics pursues theories of reality and the ultimate nature of all things. The aim of metaphysics, it's a comprehensive view of the universe or an overall worldview. And the questions include, why is there something at all rather than nothing? It's a crazy question, super broad, but it's asked and speculated about and argued about. Is time real, like objectively real, or is it an illusion, or only subjectively real? Same for space. How about cause and effect? Is that relationship real, or do we only perceive one thing following another? What is the nature of consciousness? Is it materially based, or is it ideologically based? Is it material or immaterial? Do humans have immaterial souls? Do we have free will? Or is that just an illusion? And does God truly exist? And if so, in what manner? Now, a lot of these questions have been answered by physics, for instance, but a lot of them have not. Specifically, the nature of consciousness, souls and personal identity, free will, still belong in the philosophical camp, and there are no good scientific explanations for these phenomena. Another philosophical camp is epistemology, and epistemology is the philosophical study of knowledge, including its nature, scope, and limits. So some of the questions involved in epistemological research and argumentation include, what are the necessary and sufficient conditions for having knowledge? Some people posit that knowledge means you have true, justified belief, right? But then that begs other questions. By true, what do you mean by true? Does it just mean a one-to-one correspondence of an idea to external reality? Does it mean a coherence of propositions in a system, like the kind of truth you might impute to something, to a theory that hasn't been proven yet? What are the grounds of belief? So lots to still unpack in epistemology. What's it possible to know? What are the limits of knowledge? How do we come about it? Again, what do we mean by truth? And can we truly ever know anything with certainty? And to what degree? That's an example of those are an example of epistemological questions. Then there's axiology. And axiology is the study of value and the distinction between value and fact. And axiology is composed of two different subdivisions. First, there's aesthetics, and aesthetics is the study of the nature of art and the experiences we have when we enjoy the arts or take pleasure in nature. It's the study of sensation, really. So questions include, what makes something beautiful? What makes something ugly? Right? Are those judgments subjective? Are they a matter of personal opinion? Or are there objective features of something that many people call beautiful or many people call ugly that can account for that almost universal agreement about some things? What's the difference between art and mere expression? Is there one? Those are some examples of philosophical pursuits into aesthetics. And then there's ethics, and that's the study of good, bad, right, wrong, the search for the good life, and the defense of the principles and rules of morality. Ethics is doing moral philosophy. And some questions include, what is the greatest good? How can I know right from wrong? Do they even exist objectively? How should I live? Some others are, do I have any duties or obligations to other people? And if so, under what conditions? Right? So now we're starting to narrow down philosophy to where we're going to be kind of take an anchor, right? So ethics is a subdivision of axiology. So let's take a look at some areas of ethics. It's an endless flow chart of philosophy. We started really broad and we're starting to narrow it down now. So some areas of ethics are descriptive ethics. So descriptive ethics involves observation and description and explains the actions and behaviors of individuals and groups. But you're just describing, like a cultural anthropologist does descriptive ethics when they go and do field work somewhere. They will simply report the ways that a particular group behaves and the codes that they hold one another to, right? That's doing descriptive ethics. Then there's metaethics, and metaethics examines the nature and origin of ethics and moral judgments. So it kind of gets behind and underneath ethical judgments and says, where do these even come from to begin with? Why do we do this as human beings? Why do we have these notions of good and bad? Is it just what's useful or not useful? Is it intimately entwined with our capacity to reason? Do we have these notions of good and bad in order to make social life possible? Where do they come from? And are they, in fact, kind of or ethical? Can ethical judgments ever be objectively true or false? That is, hold for all people at all times? Or are they always only relatively or subjectively true or false? Those are some metaethical concerns. Then there's normative, otherwise known as prescriptive ethics. And before I say anything about that, there's always, not always, but very often we're going to find other ways of describing the same camps, the same type of theories. That's pretty par the course in philosophy. Please don't let that confuse you. So normative ethics are often referred to as prescriptive ethics. And I kind of prefer prescriptive ethics as far as terminology is concerned, because it goes nicely with descriptive ethics, right? Some of these describe and some of them prescribe, like a doctor would prescribe you a certain kind of medicine, right? You have this illness. I suggest that you ought to take this substance. And in this subfield of ethics, or this area of ethics, that's where we get the theorizing about what is right and wrong and how can you know. And then there's applied ethics, and that's using ethical theory to try and resolve a controversial issue. So as we continue to narrow down from philosophy writ large, we're going to be using normative/prescriptive ethics or ethical theories. First, we'll be studying those in order to get into applied ethics. And that's using these theories to try and pick apart and resolve a controversial issue. Bioethics is a part of applied ethics. And it's only one part of applied ethics. You can do philosophy of anything, and a lot of people build careers on this stuff. Whatever they find interesting and wherever they find a lack of scholarly material, a niche, right? It's like you can just do philosophy of insert word here and then start doing work on it, and you've carved out a career for yourself, right? I know that sounds a little pessimistic, but sometimes it is. It can get really funky. But there are some tried and true ones, like environmental ethics, business ethics, journalistic ethics, legal ethics, animal ethics, and bioethics, also known as biomedical ethics. So what is bioethics? So we already know that ethics is a philosophical discipline pertaining to notions of good and bad, right or wrong, and our moral life in the community. Bioethics is the application of ethics to the field of medicine and healthcare. And also, when you just say bioethics, it can go to like animal rights and other sorts of issues like that. But we can use those terms interchangeably. We're going to be focusing on medicine and healthcare. Ethicists and bioethicists ask relevant questions more than provide sure and certain answers. And this is important. Oftentimes, you're not going to get a solid answer. You're just going to get a better argument for or against a position, right? An argument that's grounded in reason, and that's grounded in ethical theory, and grounded in a good ethical position. And hopefully, it's the good argument that wins the day, right? All too often, we tend to make our decisions based on our emotions as opposed to our reason. And hopefully through this class, I'm not saying anyone in here does, but generally speaking, that happens quite often. And hopefully what we'll be exposed to in this class are the attempts to make good, logical, grounded, cogent arguments for bioethical issues. But sometimes you end up even more confused than you were when you started, because both sides can be argued for equally cogently. But there is a plus to that too. You know more, right? Some examples of bioethical issues are, for instance, performance-enhancing drugs in sports. Yay or nay? Human organ selling. Should you be able to to sell your kidney? A kidney, for instance. Right now, that's illegal. Genetic enhancement, CRISPR technology. How far should it go? Physician-assisted suicide. Should that be legal? There's like 12 or 13 states where it's legal now. That's a bioethical issue. Prisoner experimentation. Some others are healthcare. Should it be recognized as a universal human right? That's a big one. And in our COVID vaccinations and their distribution, major bioethical conundrum. And also some issues in biotechnology as well. So briefly, I wanted to mention the Belmont Report of 1978. Now, later in the course, a few weeks, we will take a look at this much more carefully. But the Belmont Report of 1978 was created by the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research, partially in response to the Tuskegee untreated syphilis experiment. And if you're unfamiliar with that, we will take a look at that later in the course. And this Belmont Report was generated by it's the result of a conference And it was comprised of experts from all sorts of fields. And in the end, they all came to a certain agreement involving the ethical principles and guidelines for research involving human subjects. And those are respect for autonomy, beneficence, and justice. And the idea is that in addition to classical ethical theory, anytime one finds themselves in a controversy, right, and a bioethical controversy, these three principles should be upheld as equally as possible, right? One of these shouldn't pop up above the other. All like if you imagine that you're juggling, right? You've got three balls and one's respect for autonomy, one's beneficence, and one's justice. You want to keep them all in the air, like at the same time, as you're trying to think through and come to some sort of preliminary conclusion about a bioethical issue. More on that in the future. Oh, sorry. And these principles draw from philosophical ethical theory, which is why we spend the first few weeks pounding out philosophical ethical theory. Okay, so topics covered: philosophy in general, which is comprised of those different focuses, right? Logic, metaphysics, epistemology, and axiology. Axiology, which is comprised of aesthetics and ethics. Then we looked at areas of ethics, like descriptive, prescriptive, meta-ethics, and applied ethics. Then we looked at bioethics in general, and we briefly touched on the bioethical principles to be looked at more carefully in the future.